Hello and welcome to our very special program. It's called Moving Forward. I am Abdul Ali.
And I am Dara Hamilton.
Good to be here with you, Dara. And this is going to be one of many programs that we're looking at some matters within our community and to try to see how we can enhance the understanding of some of those issues. Tonight we're going to be looking at the Children's Bill of Rights, that's right. And at some time in the future we'll look at the Parents' Bill of Rights as well. And we'll also be talking about a number of subjects tonight. One of them is going to be how to teach your children discipline. That's really very, very important indeed. And of course we want to really focus on the youths within the community as a whole, because they're the people who are going to be taking over and running things very, very soon. So what we put in is what we're going to get out. Any thoughts in a general sense about the Children's Bill of Rights?
I think it's a very interesting idea that the children would need to get together in 1995-96 to come up with this Bill of Rights. And for me, it really goes to the idea that children are people too.
I agree.
Sometimes we look at them and we think that they have less value because they haven't had as much life experience. But as you said, they are what is coming after, right? And so their value is inherent in them. As they're born, they have that value. They are going to be taking over. They will be taking care of us. They're valuable people. So the fact that they had to come together to create this Bill of Rights is a very interesting concept. And it means to me that at some point we may have recognized that children weren't being valued in the way that they needed to have been.
And they made a statement about that.
And
As a matter of fact, I got the Children's Bill of Rights here, came up in April 20th, 1996. A number of children from all over the world, 7 countries, 3 continents. So
wow.
It was really big. They communicated with each other and they came up with a lot of ideas. And basically, they're saying that children should be free of abuse, they should thrive in the world and participate in influencing their future.
Right.
And
Absolutely.
there's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
Now, in terms of some of the articles, the universal rights, it says as compared to adults, children under the age of 18 have the right to receive special care and protection. Nothing wrong with that. They have the right to inherit a better world, the right to inherit the future in general, a really good one, right to media access, so they can go. Right. And as a matter of fact, I'm so mindful now of over at Central High, they have a particular wall over there that children can now from the school go and write their thoughts on the wall. Nice. As to what they're feeling about what's going on. A right to privacy. Some people would say, well, you cannot be in your room and I can't go in at the same time.
Right, and in fact, this right to privacy goes a little bit further. It says the right to privacy to the same extent as adults have.
Absolutely, that's right. So we need to look at those. Right to freedom of association. People can't really tell you, well, you cannot have such and such a person to be your friend. We should have to make the decision of that. Care and nurturing, a right to an education. And that's really very important. It says here, every child has the right to an education that aims to develop his or her personality, talents, and mental and physical abilities to the fullest extent possible. Right to access appropriate information, and the list goes on. Legal rights is there too. Right to vote. As a matter of fact, children over 14, based on this, should have the right to vote, the right to a clean environment. And so it's really very, very, very significant indeed. And I was very mindful, and I am now, of something the Congress did many years ago. They had come up with an idea basically to say that men should have all the rights to freedom, dignity, and whatever else. There was never any mention then of women. Right. There's definitely no mention of children. Yeah. So we need to really get that looked at again to say, and I'm not blaming anybody for what happened a long time in the past, but we need to make sure that women, we're saying and meaning it, that women have...
you mean some changes in language?
Oh, definitely, yes. Oh, yes.
I agree, and I agree with that 100%, because children, many people still say things like children don't have any rights, or you have no rights in my house, right? If they're your child, you have no rights in my house. I'm the one who makes the decisions. I'm the one who pays the bills. So you have no rights, and that really is devaluing to children. And so the fact that they had to come up with this, and that you're suggesting that we revisit it, is a very important thought, that we revisit and that we are clear about the fact that children do have rights, which doesn't necessarily mean that they can take advantage of other people, or that they have the right to be disrespectful, right, and harmful to their families. But it does mean that they have the right to be respected, as all of us as human beings do have on this planet.
And when we talk about rights, we have to talk about responsibility too, because it's one thing to have rights, but if you're going to be irresponsible in terms of the rights, that's not going to work either. It's not going to work for adults, and certainly not going to work for children. So we need to do, or continue to do, a lot of work with children to make sure that they understand what their rights are. For example, we need to listen more to what children have to say, and not just say, well, shut up, I don't want to hear from you. You really have no say in this matter at all. So we need to treat them with a sense of dignity, just how we would like to be treated.
Absolutely.
That's really very, very, very important. We need to recognize as well that children make plans just like we, the adults, do.
Yeah, but they have their own ideas, their own desires.
That's right. And they have these things called cell phones, and as you know, you could easily go in and Google stuff and so on and so forth. We need to make sure that we look at that. Now, look at it from another end now. We need to, like, for example, I was disappointed to see that there was a 6-year-old on the mainland who had shot a teacher. So the question is, what is a 6-year-old doing with a gun? And then I saw another bit of video, a younger person, maybe around 3 years old.
Yes, I saw that one. Yes, yes.
So what's happening there? Where are we going in that direction? And this thing with the 6-year-old, I think that basically they counted another 3 or 4 cases where 6-year-olds had guns and so forth. So we need to, there's still a need for getting people to understand discipline, and to get people to understand, young and old, that there are limitations along the way. There's rules and regulations. You cannot survive in life without rules and regulations.
Right, and I'll tell you, Mr. Ali, discipline for children really starts with discipline for us as adults.
I agree.
And how we conduct ourselves, how we're engaging in parenting, how we are modeling responses to things like anger or disappointment or frustration. And if we find ourselves modeling specific types of behavior, then our children are likely to pick up that type of behavior. And then we don't want them to display it, but we're displaying it. And so our lack of discipline sometimes results in difficulty teaching our children the very discipline that we want them to have.
So it's going to mean that in a lot of cases, us adults, we need to begin to rethink how we are operating.
And a lot of it comes down to these children's Bill of Rights. This idea that if I treat my child as valuable, then they learn how to treat other people as valuable. And so the discipline for the adult ends up being the discipline with the child. And if we treat them according to, as we would someone with respect and with dignity, then they learn to treat the world with respect and dignity as well.
Absolutely. Well, one of the other problems we found, and we need to address that, is that even, say, the legislature, even, say, the Congress and so forth, there's never really been any sort of effort that we know of to say, well, we're going to get a Bill of Rights for children and see them just as adults. Or at least behaving in certain ways.
Right, and so I don't know that the Bill of Rights necessarily says treat children as adults or assume that they have the same level of experience and decision-making capacity as adults would. It really speaks to the ability or our need to respect children.
Yes.
And respect the fact that they are beings who have feelings, who have desires, who have expectations about the world, and have a right to some degree to self-determination, to decide what they want for their lives, and that they decide health. So a lot of this has to do with the health of the children and the health of their futures and their
Absolutely.
right to have a good future.
How do we treat children who generally are considered to be rude? They don't want to obey any instructions at all within the home where they live. They're ready and willing to curse parents in not pleasant ways.
Yeah.
And sometimes what happens is that people just build it up inside the body, and next thing you know, they want to fight parents and so forth.
Right.
So that is something we need to look at. I mean, should we be asking for help from outside when those situations are developing?
Absolutely, absolutely. If we have that developed situation already in our home, then that is an opportunity or a time when we need to ask for some help to fix that situation. It's very difficult to be in a situation that we've kind of created in some ways.
Yeah.
Oftentimes we're the ones who have modeled that behavior
That
for
is
that
true.
child,
Yeah.
and then we don't want them to engage in that behavior. The child does something we don't like, and so we spank them, and then the child goes to school and they hit another child who has done something that they don't like, because that's what they understand is what we do when someone does something that we don't like. And then we go back and then we hit the child because the child hit somebody at school, and we tell them don't do that. But we've never shown them what to do when somebody does something that we don't like, or something that is a violation of our boundaries or our expectations. And one of the ways we can respond to that is say things like, you know, when you do that, it's really frustrating for me, and I'm going to need you to go to your room right now, or I'm going to need to step away for a second, or you're not going to be able to have television right now because that was a violation of our rules that we have for the household. Whatever you did made us feel unsafe, or it makes it unpleasant for us to be around each other, so we're going to have this consequence, so we can explain that to them. And so instead of hitting them, which then says, when someone doesn't do what you like, you hit them, we can say, you know, this is the consequence for doing that behavior, and this is how it fell out into the family, or how it impacted me. I don't like it when you use those words. These aren't nice words. We tend to speak to each other nicer than that. Let's use more pleasant words than that. If you're going to use those words, then you need to go in your room.
Absolutely.
You know, those aren't words that we use. But I will also say that the child is probably using words that someone has said to them.
Precisely. And one of the other things that we need to consider as well is that behavior starts up here in the brain and in the mind. All the choices that we make, good, bad, or it all starts up here.
It does.
So we need to spend more time thinking about what's happening in our minds.
Mr. Ali, you have hit it right on the nail, because our brain is a pattern-making machine. That's all it does, is it forms patterns, and it sees patterns, and it ingests those patterns, and then it spits those patterns out into the world. And so if our patterns are negative, then that's what the child learns. Their brain learns those patterns, and it's more likely to act on those types of patterns than other patterns. And so that's the idea behind children do what we do. They don't do what we say, they do what we do. And all of that does happen at the level of the brain. We have brain cells, we have mirror neurons, which are specific brain cells that allow us to mimic behavior, learn behavior, and empathize with each other. And those brain cells, for example, these are why if you yawn, I yawn. Automatically, I didn't even have to think that through. You yawned, and we say yawning is contagious, and it's because of those mirror neurons. And that's a big way that children acquire behavior, is right at their brain level. They're not thinking about it, their brain is just sort of doing it, it's absorbing it. And so because of that, we have to set good patterns in place, because they will learn those patterns. They will not learn patterns that they haven't been exposed to.
So how do we begin doing that? What sort of plan can parents, adults, teachers, because teachers are the people who have contact with the children for several hours during the day. What do you suggest we do? Is there like a 3-point, 5-point plan that we begin to look at, so that we can change what's going on up here?
You know, starting earlier is better than starting later.
Yeah.
All of our experience shapes our brain and shapes our behavior. And that is from prenatal experience on up. It shapes the way our brain is formed and how it functions. So we want to start earlier than later. When it's later on, now you have a child who's a little bit older, more difficult to control because they've already developed these behaviors, and then the intervention is harder for us as adults, who get really frustrated, and we get triggered by what we call bad behavior. So in terms of a plan, we definitely want to get some support with it. We want to be able to recognize that there is a problem, that there is an issue, and that we have a role to play in fixing that issue or solving that problem. Many times, as a psychologist, many times you'll have people come in with their children and they'll just say, here, my child is behaving badly, you kind of fix that child. And it's really difficult to do if the family is participating in creating and maintaining this problem. And so as a parent, we have to recognize or be willing to accept that I have a role in fixing this, which means I'm going to have to change some things about what I do. Change some things that I do in order to change what's happening with my child. I have a very good friend who is just amazing in terms of how she approaches situations like this. She said she will say to her son, I made a mistake and I'm sorry. I allowed this, and now I realize that this is not something that works for our family, and I'd like us to work on changing it. So she takes responsibility for any patterns that her family has been allowed for her children to adopt. And I think it's a lovely place to start for people, no matter how far down the road we may be. It's a lovely place to start. We can go back and we can still say to our children, I understand that this is something that maybe you learned from me, and I am sorry. And let's work on doing this differently. Let's work on developing different patterns of behavior in our family so we can feel happier and healthier. It's okay to do that. But we have to recognize there's a problem
and
first.
Also remembering that we were once children, because you were born and then you become a child and you're young adult.
So, Mr. Ali, tell me what you remember about that you feel like relates to this. When we say we were once children, what does that mean?
Yeah, well, I remember particularly in Nevis that we had some terrible earthquakes going on. And the lady who brought me up, and my mother died when I was 10 days old, so they gave me to somebody else. And she took myself and her granddaughter out on the side of the road, even though when the earthquakes were really getting mad, and she looked up in the air and said, Lord, take us now. Well, as a matter of fact, the Lord did not take us. However, the point is that after all that, I remember how brave this woman was, and that she was willing to surrender herself, and not only herself, but the three of us, into whatever the circumstances were. Yeah. And so that has always stuck with me as something, and as I grow older, I remember that particular behavior, and that has stuck with me. So important to be able to surrender at the most challenging times.
I think it is useful for us to go back and kind of reflect on what things were like for us as children. I do believe that is helpful to some degree. Again, as an adult who's willing to look at a child's experience, that would be helpful then, because if you remember when we were small, or I remember when I was small, these adults seemed huge. Absolutely. They were gigantic. They were very powerful. They were all controlling. Imagine a child who was like 1 or 2 or 3, how huge, how large an adult must look to them.
Right.
And so if we put ourselves in that position, it may help us have a little bit more empathy for how we are responding and how we're treating our children. When we look back at our experiences, we might look back at teachers that we had who were either helpful and kind and supportive, or teachers we had who were harsh and mean and shaming and degrading, or experiences with our own parents that felt bad, or experiences with our own parents that felt good. And if we look back at that, we may draw some parallels and say, what am I doing with my child that feels good? What am I doing with my child that feels bad? Am I carrying out some of these old patterns that were developed in me?
Well, it's really worth it in the long run, because what we put in today is what we're going to get out tomorrow.
100%.
If we put nothing in terms of the behavior, all that we're going to see is encourage negative behavior. That's what we're going to end up with at the end of the day. And that's not really very good indeed. And in terms of education, because that's another big issue, what would you say we're really educating people to do? What would you say at the end of the road is the outcomes are likely to be?
as far as I'm concerned, Mr. Ali, we are honestly educating people to carry on society
Yes.
in the way that we see it needing to function.
Mhm.
I believe, of course, that we want to educate people to improve society,
Yeah, that's true.
and but more often we educate them to carry on the status quo, right? To do what we've always done,
Yeah.
as opposed to do
Wow.
new things in a specific direction. And I think that we need to be more intentional what we want to create in our children, what type of citizens do we want to have in the
Yes,
world,
true.
what type of experiences, and then we can really gear our education more toward that. I strongly believe that the education system is also responsible for the social, emotional, behavioral development of our children, and that gets really minimized and marginalized
Right.
as they go through with a stronger focus on academics. But as you said, everything starts from our mind, and
That's
everything starts from
That's
our
very
mental
true.
health. And so if we are raising people who are savages, but they know how to read and write, then what will our society look like if we're raising people who are just not able to get
We
along
got to
or that
invest,
kind?
and that's really very
Right,
important.
and so that may be something, a
Mhm.
place that we start,
Yes,
is that the
that-
most important thing is the social emotional, and then the academic can go on top. Because once the social emotional stuff is not in place, then these are children who are disruptive, who are unruly, who are tearing up the schools, who are doing things that
Because
are
that's
disruptive
all that they
because
think
they're
about.
not
Yeah.
regulated,
they're
and so
holding
we
on
need to put a lot of
anger
focus
for
on it.
ages, and not saying it's time that I let
Exactly.
anger go, and also it's time that I begin to treat people in the way I would like to be treated.
And it's hard to be to want education when we're feeling so bad, right? So if
Mhm.
you were feeling really hungry, it would be hard for you to desire to study. Or if you were feeling really angry or afraid or anxious, then it would be hard for you to want to go to school or want to perform. So really that piece is really important in terms of the education of our society, is educating citizens who are able to participate in society in healthy ways.
Right. Well, we only have a few minutes, maybe around 3 minutes or thereabout. So I think that we could see what we could come up with in terms of things we would like to see. I would definitely like to see senators, I'd like to see the Congress and other people take note of the Children's Bill of Rights of 1996, April 20th. Start to do some work on that. Recognize that children are important and they're people too, and that they need help, support, understanding and guidance, and to look at the benefits of really making sure that our children, and I think in due course we're going to try to have some of our younger people on the show and
Yes.
hear from them as
And
well.
maybe evaluate whether the laws in place
Yeah,
are laws that support these rights.
absolutely.
For example, the right to medical care.
Yes,
Are the laws in place, do the laws in place support their right to medical care? Do the laws in place support their right to, I skipped that one, sorry.
mhm,
The right to not be exposed to prejudice,
absolutely.
right? Or the right to care and nurturing.
We-
Do the
we-
laws, and not just the laws, but
Perfectly.
also the procedures that we have in place.
Well, we could do a little bit on our own, and I think we're just about at the end of the program, and I want to say that to thank the Government Access Channel, Mr. Earl Morris, the man himself, and of course George Matthew for helping us here along the way, and we will be discussing some more subjects as we go along. The world of a teenager is something we would look at. We certainly want to be looking at something from the parental point of view as well. Drug usage, parenting in a very general sense, and of course fatherhood, marriage. People get married, and there's some things they need to know what they're getting into once they decide to go on that particular route. So I just want to thank you so much for sharing, and as I said, we're looking forward to doing something more or less on a weekly basis with different subject matters as we go along. And let's not forget about finance and investments, because children need to know how to spend money and to do whatever they need to do in that particular regard. So there we go, folks, and this is moving forward, and I trust that we have moved forward just a wee bit at this particular time. Thank you very much, Dr. Hamilton, and we'll keep doing what we have to do.
Thank you, Mr. Ali, for all you do.
And we got to do some moving forward too.
Yeah.